Well, good afternoon, listeners. You're listening to Lament of Hope podcast, and I'm your host, Danielle Richardson. And I am very excited and just blessed today to be able to be speaking with Christina Perri. Um, she obviously singer-songwriter, famously known for her song A Thousand Years, which was used in Twilight, but honestly, it's followed her throughout her career. And what's really neat is she's actually releasing a book, a picture book, which is coming out April 1st, called A Thousand Years, and it's about the love of a mother that she has for her children, specifically her daughters. And Christina obviously has been through a lot of sadness and sorrow when it comes to children, but she's also has two children of her own that she loves dearly. Um, and I think it's just really neat that she's making this testament out of this song in a way that it can not only relate romantically, but it can also relate to children, it can relate to friendships. And I think that's just beautiful. So, Christina, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Hello, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, I wanted to ask you, because it's motherhood, I think it's complex in your industry from my perspective.
Mhm.
Motherhood is not always something that is talked about, especially if you're a singer. It's much more focused on your career and your music. But you seem to have such a treasured love for your children, which I think is beautiful. But at the same time, you still do your passions, which is music and songwriting and even making this book. And so I wanted to ask you, like, what do you find so important about motherhood to the point that you think this picture book is something that you really want to get out into the world?
Well, that's such a great question. I mean, thank you for acknowledging that. I feel like it's interesting to me because my perspective is like I'm just sort of being myself. And like when I became a mom, it made complete sense for me to sing to my children, about my children. Like I feel like I have this inability to be inauthentic. This is what my closest friends would say. Like I'm almost like allergic to it. I don't know if you know the Enneagram, but like I'm an Enneagram 4 and I just like can't not be truthful like with where I am and who I am. So I guess I took a huge risk if I think about it now, like if I look back when I first had Carmela, and I remember saying to my record label, like, hey, I don't really feel like doing a pop album and going on tour and pretending I didn't just have a kid. Like, I'm not going to sing songs about, terrible guys that I dated because like I got married and like I'm happy and like I don't want to pretend I'm who I used to be and I'm sort of still figuring out who I'm becoming. But I'd like to sing songs for Carmela because like I do that like every day in our house, and so I'm like singing to her, and I was trying to figure out a way to like marry my career with motherhood, and like it just makes sense. And I remember having them sort of be, hesitant, like, what? Like you want to make a lullaby record? And then funny enough, they even said like, fine, but it won't count like towards your record deal, which means like it wasn't considered like a real album. For me, it was called like um a novelty or a specialty album or something like that. Like it wasn't like traditional Christina Perri music is what they said. So I find that really fascinating because it's like, wait, can I also be that? But what's very me is that I just pushed that boundary and I just was like, well, I'm gonna do it. So like this is, sort of how, this is what I want to do and this is what I feel comfortable doing. And you just sort of have to trust me. Like I will also credit the team that I had at Atlantic Records I had for 14 years, and like we did trust each other. And even though they had sort of like a resistance against it, they were sort of like, all right, well, they told me Jar of Hearts was never going to be on the radio because it didn't have drums, and that we like I've always proved things wrong. I think that's a theme throughout my life. So I feel like when I made that album for Carmela, I was definitely taking a risk that I was gonna like fall off the scene a little bit, which I did as far as like a recording artist, not so much, but like a performer. Like I was like all of a sudden not touring. Like I remember my last giant tour was 2015. I mean, that's a long, oh my God, it's 10 years ago. So that's like, so for 10, oh my gosh, that's crazy. So for the past 10 years, I've been in my sort of motherhood journey. And then I've been figuring out a way to make my music career work within that, but not the other way around. And I think it's really, not that common maybe, or I wonder if more women wish they could do that. And like maybe it's part of my purpose is to show them they can. The other part of it is like maybe a lot of women are doing it and they're just not talking about it, or maybe they like I had this conversation the other day with a friend of mine who was asking about, how I balance it all. And I was like, can we just stop asking that question and just start showing people how we do it? Like instead of like a
Mm.
can it be done, can it just now be like, look how it's done? And I feel like I'm not the only person doing that. There are definitely incredible musicians, women and moms who do it. But I also think it's really important to show the ebb and flow of it. So like someone like, I don't know, Alanis Morissette, let's say, like she went away for a couple years, as far as from our point of view, and then came back. But like, what was she doing in that time? Like, she was enjoying motherhood. She was being present for her children. She was doing a much bigger job, and like, I feel like that's no diss to, the music industry or what we do as musicians or songwriters. It's an awesome job. I just feel like all of a sudden when you become a mom, your priorities shift and change, and that's like really normal and really like should happen. And so I think it's really nice that I'm able to do that. And then what's amazing is that for me it worked. And like that part I could never have guessed that, that Songs for Carmela was going to do so well that my record label came around and was like, "Hey, when's your next lullaby record?" And I was like, "Whoa, well, let me have another kid," And then so I started like it started just sort of weaving into my career, and I feel really lucky that that happened because then I was able to commercially have success, which makes other people support you, like, my team. And, it's a big responsibility to have, you know, um, I don't know, a project work or not work. Like, a lot of people are counting on it to work. And so it ended up being, just really lovely that the people that did listen to my music were also entering their era of becoming a parent. And then my music was resonating with them because they were like, "Oh, we know this voice. This person sang, our wedding song, and now she's singing songs to our crying children, or our, sleeping children." And it became like just another piece of the story that like I'm intertwined in all these people's lives and in like a loving way. And yeah, 15 years ago, we were all singing about how we hated our boyfriends, but then like 10 years ago, we like met the love of our lives. And then 5 years ago, we're singing to our tiny little people. Like, but it's literally what happened to me. Like it's just my story. It's my story that I'm just sharing. And then people are like, "Yeah, me too, me too, me too." And then they are responsible for even giving me the chance to keep doing it. Like I'd be doing it either way. I'm not gonna lie. Like when I had Carmela and Rosie and Pixie, like I knew I was going to make albums for all of them, even if my record label didn't want me to, or if no one listened to the lullabies, like I still would have made them as a mom. So I don't know if this is a really long answer to your question, but I feel like it's impossible for me not to have all these parts of me be a part of my creativity and my job because I just refuse sometimes to do something that doesn't feel, I don't know, honest and where I'm at. And then I will say, the more I've done it and the more I've leaned into this, the more of a purpose and sense of purpose I've felt because of the conversations I've had with people and them learning about so many little nooks and crannies of pain and the language of the heart that I like so much love and speak to in my music, and then now speak to in children's music, and now also just speak to women and people about fertility. And I mean, it just like keeps evolving and growing, but it's like unfolding. So I know I'm doing the right thing at the right time, though I could have never guessed. It's a really long answer.
No, I love it. I think I'm just surprised, honestly, because I think you're right that it's so interesting because, and this is again my perspective, but the music industry, at least the large names and numbers, it's more like there is not there from that end of the spectrum, it's much more like motherhood side thing. Don't really talk about that.
Mhm.
And but then when it's your listeners with the listening experience, the vast majority of people are mothers. So it's like,
It's
yeah, they
weird.
really it is. It's and so for me and seeing your industry in a lot of ways just kind of go, yeah, that exists, but we're not going to really talk about that, or at least not even in a positive light sometimes, which is hard. But seeing you go against that and go, no, like I think that I love it and it's not in hit, trapping me in any way and I can combine the two and I feel good and it's all working out. Like you said, I think that's a huge encouragement because I think that's more of your, layman's experience. And I think that's really neat that you're allowing that part of humanity to be very keenly felt in your music so that people can. And I mean, like, how cool is that that you're people's wedding songs and then you become songs for their kids? I mean, that's like, I think
Yeah,
that's really cool.
right. Same. I mean, what's funny too is like my best friend was over yesterday and she was like, I mean, my best friend since I was like 16 and she was like, "Man, could you have imagined if we told like, 23-year-old you like with the blonde streak and the combat boots that like in 15 years you were gonna be like wearing like a rainbow shirt and being a children's author?" And I'm like, "No." I could not have imagined telling myself that. I wouldn't have believed it because I just like I guess I couldn't have dreamt that big because to me it feels like what a gift, like what a cool uh ability to evolve. I feel like, you know, how sad it might be if I was still singing about heartbreak and which I mean there's all different types of heartbreak I do still sing about, but I mean it like how sad it would be if I was the exact same person at 38 that I was at 23. Like I would feel sad about that for me personally, like if I wasn't growing and so to have these experiences and to get to have a family. And I mean that was kind of my dream all along. Like I come from a very big Italian family and I remember very clearly being on tour and being like 26, 27, and all of a sudden getting like baby fever, being like, what the heck is this? Like I'm looking at babies, I'm like, like what? Like it went from being a baby, to like wanting a baby, but like very quickly, almost like a light switch. And I remember thinking like, that's weird. Like nobody else in my industry, like, I'm on tour with, well, it's mostly guys too. Let's be honest. Like all the artists I was touring with were all guys, or if it was a female, like the rest of the crew were all guys, and it's easier for guys to go on tour, even as a dad. So what's funny too is like my band, like they could all come on tour with me. They all have kids. We're all parents now. My band and crew that I was with 10 years ago, they're still my best friends. We still talk all the time. And we're planning on doing little things here and there and have throughout the 10 years we've done shows together. But it's so easy for the dads to just hop on a plane and come to the show versus like my piano player who's a mom and my cello player who's a mom. Like, we have to have childcare and we have to carry the weight of wondering how everyone is and we have to know that our child actually wishes we were there and not who is it's like a mental load. And but I just think it's really, again, I think so much of the story or the narrative has been how do you do it, how do you do it? And I just think it's just not a matter of how anymore. I think we just have to continue to show, um, like you're saying, the listeners are just, everyone, the majority of people listening and enjoying music or buying children's books. I mean, their parents, like that is so relatable. That is the most relatable thing you could do. So unless there's like some reason to have some mystique about you, like maybe you are some character that you just like don't want anyone to know like who you really are. I don't think there's any reason to not integrate your real life into your art because I feel like that's what people connect with. Like I will say, like if I were to zoom out and think about what it was like when I was on stage versus in like meet and greets, let's say. Like when I would get to like meet people that came to the show, like we're like hugging, they're crying, we're like talking about, heartbreak or love or encouragement or just feeling a part of or seen or it's just like this most emotional, like beautiful human stuff. And then when you're on stage, you're performing and the people in the audience are feeling that, but it's different because you are like you're doing a show basically, and the people are choosing to connect to you and the songs and whatever. But like when you're face to face with someone, like how do you not just like really be there with them? Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? I feel like I always loved meeting people because the performing part wasn't my favorite. It still isn't. I mean, I do it when because it's part of the whole job. But the performing part sometimes feels distant from like the connection. I want that connection all the time. So that's what's so cool too, is that like as I grew up and as I started going through stuff, like I have so many things to talk about with people. Like it's not just like how cool are my songs. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
like you got married to my song, cool. So oh wow, this song made you feel better and you were like less depressed. Great. Like I just kept gravitating towards like more emotional, more intimate, more I don't know, important and like it just felt like such so fulfilling to me. I want to say like more than just like I said like a performance like da 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 like that part didn't feel like why I was doing it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I felt like I was too sensitive and too emotional and too I mean honestly nervous. I was like I'm not even sure I like performing. Like I don't even know, and then people would encourage me by saying like that connection, is helping them. And then I was like, oh, okay, so this is a way to be of service. So then if I think about it that way, then I can sort of get myself out of my own head thinking like, I don't know, all the stuff I come with in my brain. But I felt a sense of purpose to do it. And then, like I said, like as I've just been growing up and things have been happening to me, it's like more and more relatable. Like I couldn't be more relatable. I feel like now that I'm like, a mom, I had fertility struggles, I've had loss, I have grief. I mean, talk about the aloneness you feel when you have grief, because that's one thing we really don't talk about a lot in our society is grief. And so, but oddly enough, every single one of us lose people that we love. So I feel like as soon as I entered the grief community, it was massive. Like, so again, I just feel like if I'm like meeting anybody in life, I have something to connect with them about. And then I'm like, I also have my music to share because I think music is such a conduit for, healing. So it's like I come with the healing part, but also the conversation and it just feels like a gift that I get to do that. And I don't really think about it too much. I just do it. Do you know what I mean? I don't plan it. I don't
Yeah.
think like, am I doing this? Like, I mean, obviously I'm reflecting on it, talking to you, but like I hardly even think about it. I just show up and do it. And I feel really lucky that I get to.
Were you, and this, I'm not asking this in the sense of your career, but were you ever afraid just as a person to be a mom? Because I have to admit, as a young person, I've had a hard background growing up, and I also have my own struggles. So I've always been afraid to be a mom because it's like, yes, I'd love to have little children, that you can hold and sing to and encourage and get to have those little moments with them that are very tender and that you'll like remember forever. But it's also like, and I mean, I've met other young ladies and I've talked to them about it. It's like you'll either meet women who are over the moon, not afraid at all, and they're like, how could you possibly be afraid? Just have tons of children. Or then
Yeah.
you'll meet other people who are like, never. I hate kids, never doing it. And then it's like, well, I would like to, but I'm just really scared. I don't want to mess them up, and I don't want to. I'm afraid of having a hard pregnancy because I've had friends who've had very hard pregnancies and they love their children, but like they suffered the entire 9 months.
Mm.
And it's like, I guess it's that aspect of it. It's like pregnancy does seem like a beautiful thing, but it's like for those who are afraid, there's
Mm.
not really an avenue, I suppose, to talk about that where it's like, yeah, I want to, I do, but I just don't feel capable of doing it. And so I wondered if you've ever felt that way, just like on a human level as opposed to career-wise.
Sure, I love that. I mean, I feel a couple ways about that. One, the truth for me, like I said, like I was on tour and I was about 27 and I went from like no, it's not that I didn't want kids. I just like didn't have a desire to do it right then and there. And then all of a sudden I did. I think every every person is going to have a different experience with whatever that sort of was. For me, it was like I just knew that I wanted to do it. And then it was just something that now lived in my body that like was always sort of in the back of my mind. That to me, maybe that's a gift. Maybe some people that doesn't happen to some people. Maybe some people um fall into it accidentally because they're too afraid to choose it. Some people uh don't choose it because they're too afraid. Like I understand every single version of it because I've now been in it in so many different ways. Like I had every experience like from the best to the worst. Like I literally had the best case scenario of all time, which is a completely eventless, typical pregnancy with my firstborn. And then I had the worst case scenario of all time, which is losing my daughter Rosie at full term, which is like the number one thing all women fear. So I had the whole
Yeah.
thing. And in between, I had all different things in between too. And so, because I was pregnant 4 times. And and so it is scary. It like absolutely is scary. And I find that maybe trying to weave in between the scary parts is not realistic. And maybe like, I don't know if it's helpful or unhelpful to hear like, yeah, I was scared. I was super scared. I was also strong enough. Like, I think the thing is like, all really great things are a bit scary when it comes to whatever it is you do in your life. Like, if I'm walking out on stage, it's scary. If I'm holding my child last week in the ER because she had rhinovirus and that she had a 104 fever and she had an IV and I'm holding her, and that was so scary. And like, yeah, like life's scary. I don't know, at least for me, because I'm so sensitive, like most of the time. So
Yeah,
I just
it's true.
wonder, like, I don't think the answer is, oh no, it's okay. It's not scary. I think the women that are like, how could you not want to have kids is the best thing. True, fine. That maybe is your perspective. The truth is it is scary and it is challenging and it is hard on your body, on your mind, on your spirit. It's just that the reward and the other side of that fear and that worry and that difficulty and that grief or whatever it is you go through, physical pain, all of it, it's just that the other side of it is so much bigger. So, for instance, like I would say to someone, you know, this is such a cheesy example, but like when I was in my 20s, I would go to Disneyland all the time. Okay. Like all the time. I lived in LA, so I was really close, and I would go and I'd bring everybody that I know and love, my parents, my family, my friends. I had a song in one of the shows there, so they would give me like free tickets, and I'd bring everybody I know. And like the joy that it would bring me to see my family, my friends have like the best day ever was amazing. Like 10 out of 10, best day, best day, best day, best day. And then I remember there was a day where I just realized I'm never going to feel bigger joy than this until it's my kid, like looking at Disneyland. Okay. So, which is, it's kind of a profound thing to think. Like I was thinking like, wow, I could have bigger love, bigger joy, bigger excitement, if I had a little tiny kid. Now again, maybe that was my baby fever, but what's fascinating is it was true. So when I had Carmela and when I have my Pixie and when I bring my girls to Disneyland, and this again is just my example, um, it is 10 times bigger and better than bringing any of my friends or family, the joy and the feeling in my chest. So to me, it was one of those things that's like, I wonder if you don't want to have kids, great. I mean, we're in a society now, like, do you. You do whatever you are, whoever you want to be. Like, that's great. I have no judgment. I have so many friends that don't have kids. I don't spend all day trying to convince them to have kids. It has to be a want, a deep desire, I think, within you to do it. But if it's fear that's stopping you, I'd say hang on, because the, the other side of that is so much bigger than you can imagine. Like they say, the that your heart grows like when you have kids. Like it's just true. Like you can be at your max and you can have a partner or you can have a dog or a cat or a job or something that you love so much and you feel so fulfilled and it's the best thing ever. And like I still think having kids it would be bigger. I get to say that because I have them, I feel like I have an example and an experience like that. And it is scary. And sometimes it's awful and like hard. And I'm crying in my room, like, and my 6-year-old like doesn't like her hair. And then I'm like, she doesn't like her. What am I doing wrong? How, the society that she's growing up in, like, what is like, was this even worth it? And like, I just remember hearing someone say to me once that you may regret not having kids, but you will never regret the kids that you have. And then
Hmm.
that really stuck with me too, because you're like, well, because that's sort of that can be in a lot of different things in your life. Like if it's you never know, then you're gonna wonder. But I think if you're even wondering that maybe that's something you want. Like a lot of my friends that don't have kids don't even think about it. They just love doing what they do and it's not something they struggle with going back and forth in their mind, should I, shouldn't I, should I, shouldn't I think that's also a clue that maybe you should try because maybe that's like a hidden under your fear is a desire to be a parent. I think a paternal or maternal instinct or feeling is really natural. um because like sometimes I just wonder like, well, then what's it all about? Like even looking at them and I'm like, what is it all about? Like you're gonna grow up and feel pain and grief, and then you're gonna have to figure out how to live in this world, and this world is really scary, and then it's like, I don't know, it just kind of feels like it's all gonna be okay when you're all together and y- you know, you feel this is so cheesy, but you feel like whole in a way, like where I had feelings of being fragmented and feeling like I didn't know, you know, if I was in the right place or with I had all these questions growing up. And then sometimes when I'm with my girls, I just feel like so at peace. And like, I wonder if that's the answer. Like, because like, why are we here? We don't get to know. Like, and I have to tell my little one, I mean, I had to teach my 6-year-old about death and because she lost her sister and there's all these awful, scary things. And then she asks me these questions and I'm like, I don't even have an answer for you. There's a lot of things that, we don't know.
Hmm.
And so if this is like, I don't know, just, well, whatever. It could be, a lot of people have a lot of theories of what they think it is. But on Earth right now, while we're here, the level of the quality of love that I feel with my girls, I feel very grateful that I decided to have that for me. Does that
Yeah.
make sense? I'm
Yeah.
glad I made the choice to do it through all the fear because the fear's there. Just got to make room for it. Like, hey, yeah, this is scary. It's going to be scary. Um, I do think we couldn't possibly mess up our kids as much as our parents' generation messed us up because we just know more. Like, I feel like, truthfully, like, I know even my mom would say that. Like, we just have more books, we have more information, we have more resources, we have more doctors, we have more, I don't know, understanding and language around all the different nuances that all kids have. And so the chances of them having a better life than the struggles we have are much higher. So sometimes I try to just look at that. Like I love my girls so much, I care so much that it's already different. Like I'm already different. I couldn't possibly do the same thing that happened to me or that I went through. I'm not, they are not exactly me. They're like pieces of me and I can help support them
Hmm.
but like, you just I think truthfully not wanting it to not be scary is the key because you can't do anything about that. Unless you want to just totally be alone and like I always think about how beautiful my house would be if no one lived here. Like, because I just love when all they're in like the right spot. And then I'm like, so when my girls are at school or when my husband's out and I'm like home by myself and there's like, and I clean up and put everything in its place and I just look at everything, it brings me joy. And then I'm like, oh, this would be so nice if it was like this all the time. And then I'm like, but what would that mean? That would mean like no one else lived here. You know what I mean? Like, so as much as I think I would like that, I have to be really honest with myself. Like, I probably wouldn't like that. I probably, or maybe I would for a minute, and then I'd get really lonely and sad. And then I'm like really glad that my girls are here and come home and mess up literally everything. And then they play with all my Legos or, they like, it's chaos. And then I'm like, well, I don't know. I just feel like it's for me, it's better than being alone. And that's what I would be doing if it weren't for them. So sort of again, my very, very long answer for you.
No, I mean it seems like you think a lot about it, which I think is wonderful. A lot of people, it's like, I don't know, I've never thought about it, and then that's their answer. Um, I wanted to ask you though, because you're right, you have experienced, which I think is, and I hope you will take it as I say it in kindness, a blessing in the sense that you've had the spectrum of the pain and the joy. And so if someone comes to you, they can actually, you know all of those things.
Mm.
And so you can be such a means of encouragement or a means of support to your friends, family, or someone who comes up to you and says, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I wanted to ask you, what was that experience like where because you had a miscarriage
Mhm.
when that's more early. So it's like, okay, obviously it's still very painful, but I would feel like it'd be so different after you've carried this child the whole time. So you're like, okay, it's gonna be good. They're here. I've made it. And then, you know, that doesn't happen. Like, what was that day like for you if you describe it? And like, how did you feel and how did you work through the grief? Because a lot of times when you grieve, right, it's either you become very bitter
Yeah.
at the world,
Hmm.
at God, at people,
Hmm.
whatever it is, or you just, you deny it. You're like, oh, it wasn't actually that bad. I didn't really, other people have gone through worse stuff, and I always try to say, but your suffering is unique to you. And so it is hurtful. It doesn't matter if it's small to me because I didn't, whatever. Like it's still, but it's always like, well, someone else hurts more. So I don't really want to say that, that was really hard for me. So how did you grieve it? And what was that day like, losing your child?
Well, it's kind of hard to describe the day it happened. I remember it so vividly. Like I'm there in a millisecond if I think about it. So I remember like laying on the couch. My husband and I were watching this show with the chess, the Queen's Gambit, I think it was called. I just remember feeling that I couldn't remember the last time I felt her move because at that point, I mean, it's a long story, but at that point, we had been alerted to a medical issue that she had, but it wasn't life-threatening. But at least I had a heightened awareness of like, oh, I need to be counting her kicks and I need to be, just making sure that she's okay in there, even though everyone's telling me she's fine and I'm fine. I still have this sense of awareness and that I really didn't have the week before that because I was just kind of floating along with no complications in my pregnancy. So even though, yes, I had a miscarriage in January of 2020, got pregnant with Rosie in May or April and found out about it in May. So then at that point, I'm still a PAL, like a pregnancy after loss. So there was an anxiety that sort of hummed in the back of my mind like the whole time, but it was not
Sure.
gigantic. It didn't take over everything because yeah, every doctor's appointment, they're like, looks great, looks great, looks great, looks great. Like we really didn't have anything to worry about until we did. And that was, like I said, it was about 10 days before she passed away that we found out about this complication. And again, it was just like, don't worry, come in, we'll check your heart rate. Her heart rate, her fetal movement, and we'll send you on your way. And that was like the protocol for having a complication in utero, which interestingly failed. Their protocol failed. So I remember a lot of the doctors in New York City when my daughter passed away, like they were really interested in what happened because what they knew to be their protocol didn't work.
Hmm.
Um, so I know that it was shocking to not just us, but to also to the hospital, to the medical staff, and all the people that we were with. Um, but I'm a human being. I mean, I was there in my body, feeling, the uncertainty of if she was alive or not, from driving from my house in Montclair, New Jersey to New York City. So I'll never forget that car ride. Like my husband and I just like didn't really talk. It was so quiet because like what do we say? It's like we knew but we didn't know. And like I had called my OB and she was like, I'll meet you at the hospital. And so like for a 32-minute car ride, like and like I just remember driving through the Lincoln Tunnel, like just silent. Just like I don't even know if there was music on. There probably was. I just was like, disassociating a little bit and
And was
got
that because, I'm sorry, you said you were on the couch. Is it because did you leave because you thought something was wrong?
yeah, because I stopped feeling her move. And that's when I called my
Okay.
doctor and she said, meet me at the hospital. So then, yes, we went from the couch. I remember my daughter Carmela was asleep and I called her babysitter to come over in the middle of the night. And she was wearing her mouth retainer. I remember when she showed up in her pajamas because it was like 11 o'clock at night. And so she was like, yeah, yeah, I'll sleep over and stay with Carmela. And so we go into the city, we go into Lenox Hill Hospital, and then they put on a fetal monitoring. And this part's really awful because they checked for a heartbeat when I walked in with these little machine things, and they heard my heartbeat, and they were like, "We got a heartbeat," and I was like, "Oh," I was like, "Okay," and I remember calling Paul and being like, who was parking the car, and I was like, "I think we're okay." Like uh, take your time coming up because he was rushing. And then, so that was even harder because
Oh,
then I get in my hospital gown and I sit on a hospital bed and the nurse comes in to do a sonogram. And that's when they couldn't find a heartbeat. And that was like the moment I'll never forget where my body sort of my like it went above my body and I was looking down at me, my husband, and the nurse because I couldn't look at them. So I was just looking up at the ceiling, but on the ceiling I could literally like see me looking down. And and that's when they couldn't find the heartbeat and you know, it was shocking. I think the best way to describe that moment was complete shock. So imagine like getting hit by a car. You know what I mean? Like you just like I was so calm and I remember my OBGYN came in and she's crying, my husband's crying, the nurse is crying, like everyone's emoting. And I'm not. And I was just like, I remember, okay, so are we gonna take the baby out like, C-section or like I was
mm.
like so, and then I remember even my husband was like, what? Like, you know what I mean? I was like, I was already thinking like forward. I was like, can we just, figure this out, this problem? Like I'm such a solutionist. Like that was my reaction in the moment. And I'm very grateful for my OB who was my delivery doctor for Carmela too. She was with us for years and she said, Christina, I'm gonna let you think about this for a while. Like I think she knew I was completely in shock. And she suggested that I not do a C-section because I would be in the hospital longer. And she knew the exact right thing to say, which was if you deliver the baby naturally, you can go see Carmela sooner. Because otherwise, they're two very different experiences in the hospital. One is a full surgery, and the other one I could go home the next day and see Carmela and tell her what happened and that whole thing. So in that moment, I knew like my mom instinct was so strong that I would do anything for Carmela. So I hold this so close to me because one day I can't wait to tell Carmela how she got me and Paul through every single moment, like every moment, like from the moment Rosie died to the moment Pixie was born, I think. So for a good 2 years, my motivation was Carmela, and she had no idea. I didn't put that on her. I didn't tell her. She was only 3. But I can't wait to tell her one day when she's like a woman or like, whenever she has the capacity to hold that. And because it was so beautiful to think in that moment that I had her. A lot of women don't have a child when they are going through all their fertility loss or, their infertility. I had Carmela and she was the biggest blessing that we had because I immediately thought, okay, I'll do this for Carmela. I'll learn what to say for Carmela. I'll, go home and straight to her room and tell her, and I'll sit down at the table on Thanksgiving, which was the next day, for Carmela, and we'll go to New York City to see the Rockefeller tree for Carmela, and we'll, celebrate Christmas for Carmela. And I don't know what I'd do without it. I mean, I really have to be honest. Like it would have been definitely harder. I do know for sure that those days, I want to say the first 3 weeks of when Rosie died, and then it was let's see, November 23rd. So then at one point it was Christmas. I just remember like, that's how my life was. It was very blurry. And I also say, which is crazy to think about, but I was sober. I also like I imagine like most people cope with pain uh in a way where they like nobody wants to feel pain. So, whether they have a drink or they take a pill or they, and that's not my experience. I had been sober for 9 years when Rosie died, and I didn't choose to lose that sobriety over this.
Hmm.
I wanted to. I remember thinking, oh man, what I would do to just like smoke weed and just like turn my pain off. But then I just thought, well, I have a child. Again, for Carmela, I was like, I don't want to lose the child I have.
Hmm.
I just I had this gift and, you know, I don't know whose it is, if it was mine, if it was bigger than me. I don't know what was sort of helping me get through it all because I was so sad, but I was so focused. I was hyper focused on not so much hurrying up. I let myself grieve in the sense that I took the time physically for me to, because I had to become unpregnant and then my milk came in and I didn't have a baby. And I mean, I was so sad. I mean, truthfully, I was incredibly sad. And I always try to wrap it up in a pretty bow because I feel like that's just how like people feel so uncomfortable with the hurt of it, And I remember even like trying to make other people feel better when I'd walk in the room because I felt like the Grim Reaper. Like I'd come in the room and no one would look at me in the eye. And so then I felt this need to like make other people feel better. Um, but I protected myself from even doing that sometimes and in self-preservation. So like by being sober, I think for those 9 years before, I kind of knew what that looked like for me, like self-care and like I didn't go and put myself in situations that I knew would be really uncomfortable. I just kind of went inward. I knew I needed to heal. And then I got very busy. So for me, and I don't mean busy with like work, I got very uh inspired, I think is a good word to say, when I decided to figure out what happened. So when we did an autopsy on Rosie, they said that there was nothing wrong. When they did my blood work and checked my placenta and all these things, they said nothing was wrong. And I just refused to accept that. And so I kind of went on my own investigation, and I do think this also helped me. So if you're asking the things I did to grieve, this was about 8 weeks after she had passed. My family and I moved to LA. We were in Jersey. We went to LA because I knew I had 3 doctors in LA I wanted to talk to. And that this town was a little bit more, uh, I don't know, like a little more progressive and forward when it comes to holistic health and listening to women and like I just had a feeling I needed to be in LA. And So I got here and I decided to go on this investigation and figure out what happened. And through the help of so many people, I certainly don't want to imply that I like figured it all out myself. I did not. I asked for help in every area of my life. But I just feel like I had the right, most beautiful team. I had a therapist who took me through EMDR. And I remember that moment where I kept saying to her, like, yeah, no, I'm probably gonna have to do that later, like when I can handle it. And she was like, no, it'd be really nice if we did it now. Like this was only maybe 10 weeks after Rosie died. And she even came to my house and sat with me and did EMDR in my bedroom. Which I don't know if your listeners know is, it's a trauma therapy. And like I was holding these vibrating things and it was actually a really profound moment where I went to the birth. I mean, I had to go to that moment. That was like the moment of trauma. Definitely the most traumatic moment of my entire life. Was that moment in the hospital bed in that room. I still see it so clearly. And looking for the heartbeat, like that I knew would stick with me forever. And I remember in my visualization in the EMDR, I was sitting outside of the hospital room door. And I think this is really powerful. I didn't want to go in, meaning I didn't want to accept, right? In all the stages of grief, there's the denial one, I think, is what I must have been in. And I was like, no, I'm not, I'm sitting outside the door. And she's like, what door? And I'm like, the hospital. And my eyes are closed. I'm crying. I mean, it was a very intense moment. And I'm like, I'm sitting there. I'm not going in. Like, I don't want to go in. I don't want to see me. I don't want to see Paul. I don't want to see Rosie. I don't want this to happen. And in my visualization, my therapist was there. And now I think that's really important to share that like she had been my therapist for 10 years. So I loved and trusted her. So I love therapy, but I also know how intimate of a relationship that is. And I feel really lucky that she was my person and that I had someone like her that I trusted and loved. And I said to her, I'm like, oh my God, you're here. She's like, what? And I'm like, yeah, my eyes are closed. I'm like, you're literally here. You're standing here with me. I'm sitting, you're crouched down and you're sitting with me outside of the hospital door. And she was like, great, I'm gonna help you open it. And so like the two of us in my visualization like opened the door and I went in and I re-experienced that moment. And apparently that reintegrates, the trauma into your brain, into the sort of correct place, and then you can start to heal. And it was so powerful. It was so powerful. So what I'm basically saying to you is like, these are sort of the stages of the healing that I did. So it was like, at first it was about making space for myself to grieve, to be home, to be gentle, to be upset, to let myself feel all my feelings. And then it was to show up for my family. And then it was, to avoid situations that would hurt too bad. And then it was uh, to focus my energy on what happened. And then it was to give myself the gift of therapy and EMDR and trauma work and these were gifts for me. Like I could have absolutely just shut the door and just I can't imagine that honestly as me because I'm so vulnerable and emotional. But I don't understand how people just do that. When you're grieving, I understand it's so much seemingly easier to shut it all down. But absolutely not. I remember thinking, no, my bar is way too high for my mental health at this point in my life to feel this type of pain and not do something about it. And so that again was another gift that I was motivated by the pain. I think some people miss that by numbing it. I think pain is very important. I've learned in sobriety that pain is the touchstone of growth. So the more it hurt, the closer I was to healing it, I thought. And I
Mm.
had that in my mind. I had that narrative. Like it's, I was no stranger to pain. And I was also had just been through the worst day of my life. And my husband also has a version of this where we even say, is this Rosie? Rosie is our barometer now. She's a gift to all of us in our family and also I hope to the world because I'm doing all this women's health stuff in her honor. But she's such a gift for Paul and I just just by being a barometer to us to always keep in perspective like what is reality and what is important. Because since Rosie passed, I have not gotten upset about something small or dramatic or not mine or someone, like I have not, like Paul and I, even our marriage is so different because we're like, is this Rosie? No, nothing compares to the worst day of our lives. So nothing can knock us off of our path. Do you know what I mean? Like we've been through so much as a couple and as an individual human being that like I just felt like I had nothing to lose anymore. I mean, obviously there can be terrible things that continue, to happen in the world or even very tragic things that could still happen in my life. I just have this experience of getting through something that was the hardest for me that I've ever experienced and that I didn't think I could possibly get through, and then I did. And so then that tells my brain that like I can get through anything. And then that did give me a bravery that is, you know, that is the gift. One of, the silver lining of this entire experience is the bravery then that bloomed in me that I then focused on to help other people. So I was like, okay, this happened to me. And so this was around February of 2021 in real time. From November when she died to February was when I was like, oh, this is my new purpose. This is bigger than music. This is bigger than motherhood. My purpose is to make Rosie's, 35-week life have meaning, which is to save other babies from passing away from what she did. So if I just do that, the feeling that filled my body like started to heal my grief. And not everybody can do that, but maybe in their own way they can, in their own version of their life, by honoring their truth, by honoring their grief, by listening. I mean, I had to listen inside my body. Like, what is it that's going on? Like, if I had not been listening, I don't know if I would have caught it or
Yeah.
like discovered the purpose in this, and or not even in her death, but the new purpose of my life by her being a part of it. I used to be so upset that she wasn't here, and I am, of course. Oh my God, I think of her, every other breath. She's there in my body, and I wish she was here. But someone said to me once, well, what if, because that's my ego, that's my human-sized ego mind wanting it to be what I want. I want her to be here. I carried her, I grew her, I wanted to meet her, I wanted to see her and mother her. And then it's like, yeah, but what if Rosie's life was exactly as long as it was supposed to be? Like what if it wasn't too short or too long? That that doesn't exist. Like what if it just was that and it was that and in me for this purpose? And that's taken me years to accept. I still sometimes struggle with that, and I certainly don't want to sound perfect. Like let me also mention that like I started taking medication. I want to say in March. So that's like 6 months later, I started taking pro. I'd never been on an SSRI, but I had such a low that I felt, I believe it was the postpartum hormones leaving my body without the baby. I think that was all part of it. Like you're supposed to have oxytocin to get through postpartum. And if you don't have the baby, you don't have the oxytocin. And so I think a lot of it was physical, biological, but that was really hard for me, for my ego, for my sobriety. I thought that it meant I was failing, that I wasn't strong enough, that like all the things I did my whole life didn't work anymore. Like, so I became humbled by the need for medication. And then I went on that, and that was like the best thing I ever did. And I was able to be just me again and parent Carmela, and then be strong enough to do the work I wanted to do, and then to be strong enough to get pregnant again and have Pixie. And so that's like one of the best things I ever did. But that was very humbling because it was not what I wanted. So much of this has been a journey of like, that's not what I wanted to happen. What do I do about it? And now how do I help other people with it? Because that feels right to me. That feels like I'm willing to talk about it. I'm able to talk about it. I'm going to Washington in May to make this test that I want to do, like a law, and I'm going to talk to every congressperson. And I mean, I don't even know if I'm going to meet the president, but I have nothing to lose and no fear about it. I feel so aligned with the purpose of doing this that it's like, yeah, please put me in front of these people. I will tell them exactly what needs to happen, and we're going to do this for Rosie. So I mean, that's a lot. I've said a lot, but it's the truth of where I'm at. Like I've done so much to get here. I still have really hard moments. I have really hard moments with Carmela where she'll just be like, it's so unfair that Rosie's not here. And she'll just cry, or she'll tell, just a random stranger that her sister died. Like it'll just be like there will be moments in my life that are incredibly messy. Like I don't want it to sound like I've got it all figured out. I just feel like I have honored the space that I've needed each time a thing was happening to almost to zoom out and look at it. And like that I think is the gift. Being open to other people helping me is huge. Like pushing people away when you need help is just, I think, the worst thing you could possibly do. Even if it feels terrible to ask for help, it's okay to feel terrible. I think that's a big thing. It's okay to feel fear. It's okay to feel terrible. You just get through it, and not being afraid of those feelings, because then at the other side of that is like the answers and the solutions and the endless possibilities and then the hope. I mean, your podcast is, it's about hope. So I do need to share this story. Like it's so important to share my story of hope. Like bottom line, just the basic part of it. Like not even, I don't even have to go into detail, but if you just want to think like, oh man, if I go through miscarriage or pregnancy loss, like it's nice to hear a story of hope that you can try again and have a baby who's alive. Like that alone is beautiful. So Pixie's purpose is huge to show people hope. But Rosie's purpose is gigantic to literally save, I hope millions of babies forever that will get, I don't know, the women will get this test and avoid losing their child because of my experience. And that feels like a gift and in all of its hurt. Um, I feel like it is, my purpose to share that with the world.
But I wanted to add too, I think what you said about grief. I was talking to a writer several months ago, and she said that one of the hardest things for her was that, like you mentioned, when she was going through grief, she'd walk into a room and everyone would just not talk about it because they didn't want to hurt her more. But she
Mm.
said it hurt her more that they didn't want to talk about it because it
Yeah.
made it seem like the person never existed.
Mhm.
Um, and I mean, for her, it was her son who she lost in an accident, but it was like she wanted them in a way, not to say everything's okay, but to acknowledge the pain. And that
Absolutely.
would be okay for her. And I
Yeah.
think that's when you mentioned that earlier, really struck me because pain is part of the human experience. We do like to avoid it because, like you said, it's so much bigger than us at times, and so we don't know what to do. But
Hmm.
I think it is so important because, like you said, through the pain there is growth and there's beauty.
Mm.
And so I'm honored that you're doing this, and also it's just so cool to see that your heart is soft in this and that you're willing to talk about that and be open about it, and that you even had another baby. I don't know if I would have done that. And so I think it's very much an inspiration to ladies. And I love that you have such a heart for people and for motherhood.
Mm.
And it's not, you don't have a cliche love of motherhood. It's like I've been through some very hard things and I still love motherhood.
Hmm.
And I think that's a testament because it's easier to say you love being a mother when nothing bad has happened yet, you know?
My gosh. Yes, absolutely. I
So,
relate. I relate so much to more of the challenges, the difficulties, the brokenness. But what's so funny, not funny, but maybe interesting is that I felt that way even as a kid. Like kids that also felt like they didn't belong were my friends. Like I had a almost like a superpower, like I could see hurt in other people. And then it's almost interesting to me that like, yeah, of course my story is not absolutely perfect because that is my one of my superpowers is to be broken, but to find the brokenness in other people and in doing that feel better. Like me feel better, them feel better, everyone feel better and get through this very hard thing called life. Because it's so hard. And it's like, but that's what's interesting to me is to be afraid of like the one thing that could make it better. Like life's going to be hard. It's going to be scary no matter what you do, where you live, what your age is, what your family's going through. Like it's just kind of hard all the time. So it's about finding the opposite of that in your own little world, like in your own, making your own, joy and love and nurturing something in you that is giving you love and that you're able to give love to. Like I just think like that's if that's not happening at the same time, I feel like life is too heavy and too hard. So I do think that, I can't take credit for loving my kids. Because they're just so lovable. But at the same time, like, yeah, man, if I didn't have them, I feel like I would be, I don't know, I maybe would not be living the life that I'm supposed to be living, whatever that means. Like, I just feel like I'm so in tune. I feel like I'm very in tune, and I feel like a lot of people know when they're going against the grain, and they know when they're going in the flow. It's kind of sometimes hard to figure out, but like when you're in the flow, it's like you know it. And so for me, like when I'm living this way authentically and being out loud and honest about my struggles as much as my celebrations and all that, like that just feels right. It just feels, and I'm just kind of doing that. Like I said, like you asked for an interview, I just said yes. Like I just show up because like so many things are happening bigger than me that like I don't know what the bigger picture is a lot of times. And so, whoever this reaches, whoever's listening to this, like I don't know if it's for one person or for 25 or for 3,000. I don't know. But even if it's like for one person that needed to hear this conversation that we had today, like that feels like the right thing to do. Like why would I say no to that? You know what I mean? I don't feel like I'm the orchestrator of everything. So um so that's what's really cool about just, you having me on your show. Like great. I really hope we encouraged someone or helped to heal someone's, brokenness because I don't know, why else are we here?
Well, Christina, thank you. I want to respect your time, and I'm so grateful that we got to do this. And for listeners, again, her book, A Thousand Years, that's a children's book, will be out beginning of April. And you can get it on Amazon and all the places where books are. And from seeing the summary and just it looks like it's a beautiful book. And it's like a New York Times best-selling illustrator that worked with her. And so, Christina, thank you so much. I've been blessed, and I'm so grateful for you and your story. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Oh, I hope you have a good day.
Thank you. You too. It's great to meet you.
You too.
Thanks for
Bye.
thinking of me for your show.
Oh, you're welcome. It was an honor.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye.